I want to tell you a story about a time I tried to do something right and ended up doing something wrong. My wife and I were young parents, like parents before we graduated college young parents. It's one thing to try and build a life with another person, but when the two of you are charged with raising and nurturing a third human, it's an entirely different level of responsibility that's required. My wife, Geraldine, is now a pediatric speech-language pathologist, but that's only been a recent reality. Way back when, she was just a smart human who knew a lot about what happens to babies' brains as they grow. And as she and I talked about how we were going to provide for our family, we considered the positive effects of having a full-time primary caregiver around, the economics of one parent working versus two, and we realized it was just better for us and our family if somebody stayed home with our new baby. And so the question became, who? Well, by the time she graduated, I had already been working for a year, and at that point it made no sense for me to stop and her to start. And now here we are, 22 years later, faced with a very logical and understandable truth. Barring a significant change in fortunes and opportunities, my wife will never make as much money as I do. And it's not that she just isn't as capable as I am, she absolutely is. It's the truth that by the time she entered the workforce, I had 15 years of experience on her. I tell you this story to highlight that even though she and I tried to do a good thing and make what we considered to be the responsible and wise choice, we ended up contributing to the system of patriarchy that rewards men economically for not being able to bear children. It's certainly a lot more complicated and complex than that, but the point is, even though we made right and good decisions, the system we are a part of had already determined what the outcome of our lives was going to be. And indeed, when we call to mind any of the ills that plague us as people, it is truly the systemic nature of them that's the most insidious. In this essay, I want to talk about the systemic nature of racism and what we can do to become anti-racist. For a lot of people, when you say racist, it conjures up images like these. And I confess, this is the way I thought of it until well into my adulthood. No doubt these people are racist, and while eliminating these behaviors and actions would contribute to the reduction in racial violence, it wouldn't do away with racism because racism is a system. Think back to my example of the patriarchy. Even though I'm not spewing hateful speech about women being inferior, I still contributed to that system. When we perpetuate the idea that racists are Klan members and Nazis, we allow ourselves to say, well, I'm not like that, so I'm not a racist, and nothing gets better. Dr. Beverly Tatum is a psychologist and educator. She's the former president of Spelman College and the author of one of my favorite books, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? In that book, Dr. Tatum defines racism like this. Racism is a system of advantage based on race. Let's peel this apart. When we speak of race, what we're talking about is a group of people who have certain differences and similarities in biological traits deemed by society to be socially significant. So, when we speak broadly of African culture or Asian culture or Hispanic or Latin or European culture, what we're doing is we're noting the differences between and similarities among a group of people and highlighting and celebrating what is unique to their particular societies, whether it's food or music or dress, etc. And the easiest way to demarcate one culture or society we've found from another is by recognizing the accidental physical characteristics of groups of people. And I say accidental because when we talk about race in this context, we have to remember that race is a made-up social idea. There's just not enough consistency in biological traits to establish the existence of clear-cut races within humanity. There's only genetic variations. I guess the simple way to say it is this: there's only one race, and that's the human race. So when Dr. Tatum talks about a system of advantage based on race, she's teaching us that certain people have decided their accidental characteristics make them better than people with other accidental characteristics. And this superiority in their minds means they should get to enjoy some rights, benefits, and immunities that other people don't get. This kind of thinking was on full display this past week when a white woman in Central Park decided to call the police and report a black man threatening her when all he did was ask her to obey the law and put her dog on a leash. Now, there were a lot of things going on in that moment, but one of them was that she was choosing to believe that if she claimed a black man was threatening her, then no one would question whether she was telling the truth. She was attempting to consciously and explicitly take advantage of the historic system that has benefited people identified as white. There are countless other examples of this system of advantage being explicit as it was that day in Central Park. The practice of redlining comes to mind as another very prominent example. But on a day-to-day basis, what makes racism such a formidable enemy is the way that it's subtle and it's pervasive. Unless you're trained to look for it, racism shows up every day not as racism, but as a normal way that life operates. The toxic reality of a system like racism is that we are complicit simply by existing in it. For people like me who are identified as white, I don't have to do anything to take advantage of the system. I simply have to go about my day. And so what do? How do we be anti-racist? Dr. Tatum provides us with a helpful image to guide us along. She says, "Sometimes I visualize the ongoing cycle of racism as a moving walkway at the airport. Active racist behavior is equivalent to walking fast on the conveyor belt. Passive racist behavior is equivalent to standing still on the walkway. No overt effort is being made, but the conveyor belt moves the bystanders along in the same direction as those who are actively walking. Some of the bystanders may feel the motion of the conveyor belt and see the active racists ahead of them and choose to turn around, but unless they are walking actively in the opposite direction at a speed faster than the conveyor belt, unless they are being actively anti-racist, they will find themselves carried along with the others." Now, there are a lot of things a person can do to be actively anti-racist, ranging from direct action and protesting to writing your elected officials and others in positions of power and authority. You can find an article linked in the video description titled 75 Things White People Can Do for Racial Justice, and I encourage you to read that list and choose things to do on a regular basis. But I find that in day-to-day life, being actively anti-racist often means challenging the value assumptions of the groups and organizations we are a part of. For instance, anti-racist educators have taught us that when we see an organization that places a high value on perfectionism and urgency, you're likely looking at a racist organization. When those qualities are emphasized, it is a strong clue that there is a system in place that rewards the people that have always been rewarded. There is no place in these organizations for considering and appreciating work that may be born of a different context. And if we're rushing to get things done, we are often willing to sacrifice the needs of our allies, say, to accomplish our goal. We don't give any space to long-term, inclusive plans. To be anti-racist in this context means being the one to name the value being assumed and advocate for a different value to take its place. Instead of perfection, appreciation. Instead of urgency, inclusivity. And if you're the leader of an organization, it becomes your duty to implement a new model of working. You can find more characteristics and values like these by checking out the Dismantling Racism Works web workbook linked below. Friends, those of us who are identified as white have work to do. As Cedric Portis, pastor of the Third Presbyterian Church in St. Louis, Missouri, says, "Being white is a superpower. Not all who possess this superpower use it for evil, but nevertheless they possess it. In the same way only a diamond can cut a diamond, only the superpower of being white can bring the superpower of being white to justice. So, we're all on the moving sidewalk. Which direction we're going to move is entirely up to us.